Welcome back to Soundbites, the show about good people doing good things in the food and drink industry. And one of those people is CJ Hélie. He's the president of Beer Canada, and fitting enough, we're talking to him on Canadian Beer Day. So, welcome, CJ.
Thank you very much. Happy Canadian Beer Day.
So, I guess the obvious question to you, or at least for me, is, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time in the neighborhood, how does one get the job of president of Beer Canada?
Well, one has to be very fortunate for sure. I started my career in beer many years ago. I funded my undergraduate work by working part-time in a beer store in Ontario and never really quite left it. So it's been a lifelong passion to help promote Canadian brewing and Canadian beer.
Awesome. So maybe, give us like the 5 cent description of what does Beer Canada do? So why is it important to have an association of your type?
So Canada has a very long history of regulating and taxing beer. So there has to be a voice that can articulate what is an appropriate level of regulation, an appropriate level of taxes that can promote and nurture a healthy domestic beer category. And so that's the principal role of Beer Canada, is to articulate why people should care about the fact that we have this sort of tremendous heritage in brewing that we want to keep for future generations.
Yeah, and I think, that it's quite staggering. I saw, as we were leading into this conversation, doing a little research, and some of the information sent to me by your team was that 88% of beer that's enjoyed in Canada is Canadian, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's an amazing number, right? It's almost unheard of that Canadians still make things from scratch, right? So we've lost a lot of that manufacturing capacity over the years, but beer is sort of an outlier. We still love our own locally made products. So we grow the finest grains in the world, barley in Western Canada, wheat, oats, corn elsewhere. We have clean water. We have abundant heritage in terms of how to transform those grains into superior beer products. And so, it's amazing Canadians continue to choose locally made beer more than all others combined. So it's a fantastic success story for Canada.
It is, and I think sometimes we're cracking a beer. We don't really think of it as in the economics of beer, in that, but it really does have a kind of significant impact in terms of our economy, right? I mean, there's a lot of jobs there and a lot of tax revenue. I mean, do you have a sense of the total value of the beer industry to Canada?
So because we are these primary manufacturers taking, relatively modest grains and transforming into these really high valued consumer products, it's a huge economic engine in communities from coast to coast, large and small. So directly employed in our brewing companies are around 21,000 jobs. But the fact that we are these manufacturers, primary manufacturers, it actually supports around 150,000 jobs. So huge employment driver across the country. Atlantic Canada certainly overrepresented in terms of the percentage of economic activity that's going on in those four provinces. Roughly $14 billion of GDP. And yes, we do pay more than our fair share of taxes.
Yeah, we do on all things, but beer particularly. But as you mentioned, here in the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, we actually over-index a bit on our support of beer and local beer. That I think I read that we have the highest number of breweries per capita in Canada are out here in the Maritimes.
Absolutely, and it's amazing how important brewing is in each of the provinces out in Atlantic Canada. These are really well-paid jobs, and that's something that provinces love to have, and it's important for them to understand that it's not by accident, right? That they have to take some time and think about whether they're doing the right thing to ensure that those jobs are going to be there for the next generation.
Yeah, and I think if we could look at the Maritime case, and certainly just because it's what I'm familiar with too, is that we see not only a lot of breweries and a lot of return there, but it's actually supporting rural communities, which I think is one of the most exciting things. And we think of like going to the wineries and have the vineyards, but it's amazing to see small breweries pop up in fishing towns and small communities across, and kind of helping keep back that trend of everybody moving to the city. Is that what you're seeing across the country? And so it's got to be something you're proud of.
Absolutely. The impact in smaller communities, it means more, right? It's more visible. It's more tangible to a lot of people. In a big city, yes, it's important to have local brewers and tap rooms, but in a small community, everybody knows everybody, and they just gravitate to supporting that local business. Huge tourism driver. What's interesting to see in this part of the country? Oh, let's go see this great new brewery, their tap room, their hospitality. So it pays back in many ways beyond simply the brewer.
Yeah, and thinking of our local little breweries, and not to belabor on the taxation side, but one, I think maybe you could explain, because we're used to going to our liquor stores buying a can of craft beer for $4 or whatever. But how much of that is actually going to the brewer? Because I think it may play a role in how people perceive how they, not only that they should buy local beer, but how they buy local beer, and the importance of going support to your local the beer shop at the brewery to buy beer.
So brewers are not afraid of paying our fair share of taxes, right? So we're not complaining about the fact that we are, heavily taxed product, but consumers should know that over 50% of the price they're paying goes to the federal and provincial government. And so, the price of the beer is being driven by tax policy more than by the brewer. The brewer themselves, after paying their employees, buying their cans or bottles, beer is a heavy product. It's expensive to move around. All of that. So their margins are very slim. And so please don't begrudge the brewer, because your price of a great bottle or can of beer is a little bit more painful today than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I always encourage people to go direct to source, because I mean, at least gives them a little extra margin to support their brewer. I'm sure all brewers, the retail environment is what it is, so most brewers will say buy it wherever you can, just buy Canadian, buy local. What are your kind of thoughts in terms of, we're talking about Canadian beer today? How what's the best way to support our local breweries?
So we do have a site, and so I encourage everybody to go to canadianbeer.ca with some ideas of how to support their local brewer. The number one ask that we have of people is, don't take us for granted, right? Yes, we've been around for longer than Canada's been a country, but it's difficult times for the brewing industry. We have not fully recovered from all the restrictions and challenges of COVID, and then the spike in inflation and the increase in interest rates. So it's a very tough time for lots of local brewers. So, take a moment, grab some friends or your family together, go out to your local pub and order a Canadian beer. And that's probably the best thing that you can do to help local breweries.
Perfect. I know you probably can't name producers, but I say probably this evening I'll probably crack a pale ale or IPA, because it's kind of, that's my general style. Although a good saison is fine too. Is there a beer or a style of beer that just kind of resonates with you? No
Well,
producer names, I'm sure.
no producer names. So it's seasonal driven for me. We are lucky to have sort of an extended fall so far. So I haven't turned over to the stouts and porters yet, but looking forward to that when the weather turns. So right now it is sort of the Oktoberfest style beers, celebrating the harvest and all of those. So
Yeah.
that's today's choice.
Nice, and Thanksgiving is coming up really soon. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, because I'm a sommelier, I've been teaching a sommelier program for 20 years. So obviously sometimes I gravitate to wine, but I think there's some beer styles that probably could do well with turkey dinner.
Absolutely. You know, the variety of styles that are being made by Canadian brewers today are just amazing, right? So there is something definitely, regardless of what you're putting on as your main course, there's a beer perfect for it.
Awesome. So, CJ, I want to thank you for your time. I want all the listeners crack a beer, make sure it's local, make sure it's Canadian, and support our local breweries. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciated the chat.